So now that you told us about like an AI tool that you use from a professional perspective, tell us about an AI tool that you use, which is like a personal tool that you're using for your day-to-day life. Okay, so if I were to ask you like one skill that any AI professional should have. So, okay, one last thing that I want to ask you. I mean, obviously, like now everybody's writing about AI in some form or the other on LinkedIn. But if you could delete like one buzzword that you've been seeing lingering around on LinkedIn a lot, and you're like, I don't believe in this, or like, maybe we have had too much of this, what would that buzzword be? Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Control Alt AI. Today I'm joined by yet another fascinating guest, Zachary Hanif, who leads data and AI ML team at Twilio. Zach has spent his career applying machine learning and large scale systems to solve real world problems. Before Twilio, he was the VP of machine learning at Capital One, where he helped scale AI across the entire enterprise. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about what it really takes to bring AI into a company as big as Twilio. How do you balance innovation with trust, with designing on low latency systems that work in real time, and build the AI capability that actually move the business forward? We definitely have the rapid fire round at the end, so stay tuned for that. So, without much ado, let's get started. Well, thank you so much, Zachary, for joining us on my podcast today. I'm super excited and very enthusiastic to talk about a lot of the stuff that we have planned for today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Ash.
So, Zachary, like Twilio has been around for like over a decade,
hmm
and you guys have been like the backbone of modern communication. So, now that we are seeing AI tools reinventing a lot of businesses, we are seeing that it's getting embedded in a lot of workflows, either from like a very core fundamental part or more from like, hey, what does it help me with from a productivity perspective or a ROI perspective, things which we would say is like low hanging fruits and something that's faster to really quantify impact. So when you're like thinking about like embedding AI in Twilio's business, do you see that as something that's coming right from the core and like flowing down, or do you see that you're trying to automate some of the processes and that sort of like funnels through the top?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think it's a little bit of all of the above, right? Which I know is a weak answer, so I'll go into some detail. You said correctly at the very beginning that Twilio has been around for over a decade, right? That's absolutely true. And where we started was as a company that primarily focused on our communications channels, sending messages over mobile messaging, sending messages via voice, programmatic voice, doing all sorts of things like that, allowing businesses, Twilio's customers, to communicate with their end audiences. Right, so it's. I think it's pretty well known that in the early days of kind of the gig economy, a lot of the major players inside of that space used Twilio's services to communicate with their the associates who are performing services that they were coordinating, as well as the end consumer who actually used the app itself as an end user, right? And so Twilio's been involved in that for a very, very long time. But as we start finding ourselves in an area where more AI and ML based opportunities are increasingly important to our customers and to the business itself, right, we have continuously transitioned to giving those customers more capabilities, right? Focusing on the things that we're already great at. Things like making sure that they can programmatically engage with their environment and make it easier to use these modern technologies to drive communications and drive further engagement. So, for example, things like, our conversation relay offering and compliance toolkit are both great examples of how we either enable our customers to drive AI driven workloads, processes, and workflows, right? Or embed these capabilities directly and seamlessly into the products themselves, allowing our customers to make sure that when they're issuing these communications, they're safe, they're compliant, they're trusted, right? That's the overall essence here. If I had to say in a sentence, right, where the company is generally trying to go inside of this space, it'd be more along the lines of Twilio's goal is to be a platform infrastructure, right,
Mhm.
for every single interaction that any of our customers could have with their audiences, right, and to drive that further in an increasingly AI and data powered world. We're embedding these capabilities directly into our products, and we're making it easier and easier for our customers to take the developer centric, platform centric environment that we have and use it with
Yep.
whatever tools and technologies they might already have that they rely on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that totally makes sense. And I think like part of that you just touched upon, right? Like that you're trying to embed it in the very core product that's been used by your user base.
Yeah.
Like there is a loyalty, there is a value prop that your users are seeing. And now that you're thinking about that, one of the biggest differences that we have seen in like, what's happening with companies who are racing towards adding AI in their stack is there has to be like a central moat that you're sort of building around,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be we have a very strong ecosystem of products, or we have like an insane amount of like customer loyalty, or like a lot of companies rely on like a ton of their data that they have been collecting over the years, and like that's basically what gives them personalization, that's what gives them like the moat in order to differentiate and call themselves a leader in this
Mm-hmm.
space. So what would you say is that moat or is that advantage
Yeah.
for Twilio?
Yeah. So that advantage, I think, really comes down to like a single thing. We are the last mile of the communication chain, right? For every single customer's inbox and phone number. When you get down to it, right, we're the last link between point A and point B, right? And that is an extremely privileged position to be in, right? That's a huge benefit because it helps us bring these capabilities and customer use cases, right, from the cloud into a place where it can actually drive an outcome in the here and now, right? When users are leveraging Twilio's capabilities, they are getting this blend between communication channels, the pipes that allow things to communicate, right? The data that those customers wish to provide Twilio to optimize their communications, right? And then the AI capabilities that allow that customer to better understand, hey, have those conversations been effective? Are you driving
Yeah.
the results that you want? Is your audience engaging with you in a meaningful capacity? And probably most importantly, right? How are you able to structure ongoing messages and communication patterns to be of value to everyone inside of that chain, right? And that is the unique perspective that Twilio has. Because we are that end link between a message sender and a message recipient, regardless of the nature of that communication, we are there and we're able to provide a huge amount of value because we see both sides of that transaction in terms of what leads to engagement and where the focus is. That last mile is unconditionally an unfair advantage.
Absolutely. That totally makes sense. And I think like what you're hinting here is that, like there is a scalable motion that you already have.
That's right.
So there's a lot of like capabilities that you are already like embedding and like seeing value out
Mm-hmm.
of with your existing stack, while piggybacking on like AI's capabilities and seeing where it makes sense for you to add those capabilities. Now, like if you're thinking about like, you obviously have the scale, you obviously have the ecosystem set up for yourself. Now when you think about, hey, like these are some of the workflows, or like these are some of the pieces that you would like to like say partly automate with AI, have like an AI co-pilot to it, or like let's say we're talking about like any personalization or like any sort of like um recommendations on the way, or any sort of like prediction systems on the way, you can leverage AI capabilities to do it better. So now that with like all the scale that you have, it's no more about like, hey, let's just experiment a little bit and see if it fits where it fits. I think you already have a lot of places where you can use AI's capability in order to make things work better. So when you're thinking about incorporating or like, utilizing AI's capability in your process, what does your typical stack look like? Like, would you typically go with like, hey, let's just build this from scratch? Or are you like, hey, let's just work with a team who are best at what they're doing? Like, we'll just buy a set of capabilities. Or is it somewhere in between where like, we'll probably like get a out of the box solution from a particular provider, and then like we fine tune it because you have all of that data with you, which will help you like fine tune these capabilities better.
Yeah, as a builder, it's always somewhere in between. No matter what situation that you're in, depending on the use case you're attempting to tackle, where it is in terms of the criticality of your business, what the thing is that you're trying to solve either for yourself or for your end consumer, right? That all goes into the calculus of whether or not it's something that you buy, it's something that you build, and how you transition that over the life of a particular product. Because the decision that you make today for the first thing that you ship is probably not going to be permanent. You're probably going to go back, you're going to revisit that code. There's going to be another strategy that comes out based on other things that have happened inside of your corporate environment. No matter what happens, right? One, decisions are non-permanent. And two, right, they're all different, right? You said something a little bit earlier inside of your question, which is, hey, when you're making a decision of where you invest your time and where do you invest your resources, right? Not just how do you decide the stack that you have, but there's an implied question in there, which is how do you decide what you're actually going to do? Because in the
Yeah.
same way that you have to make a technical choice, you only have so many hours in a day. There's only so many people who can work on a problem. The company itself can only put so many resources in terms of time and energy and everything else, like the non-tangibles behind a particular product. How do you do that, right? One of the things I think is the worst thing that can happen for any firm, right, is that they spread themselves so thin they can't do anything particularly well, right? And so you had a statement which was, hey, do you just throw things at the wall and see what sticks and where does it go? And I think the answer to you there is you are grounding yourself in highly pragmatic innovation, right? The
Mhm.
first thing there is, and this plays back in a minute to the technical choices, right, of build versus buy, but you always want to start in a position of what are the use cases that your customers are hungering for? What are the gaps inside of their currently existing environments that they're expressing to you? And what are the things that you don't hear them saying that's
Yeah.
between the lines, right? It's that famous Henry Ford analogy of cars or faster horses, when what everyone really wants is just a faster means of conveyance. They ask for a faster horse
Yeah.
because they understand the concept of a horse and not a car, but they just need to get between point A and point B faster,
Yeah.
more expediently, and more conveniently, right? And so my
Yeah.
statement here is like, one, anyone who's going down this path, you want to be in a state of very pragmatic innovation with regards to what you're trying to do. You want to ground yourself to those customer problems. And from there, you will see two things evolve naturally. One, your overall technical stack. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to have to do a review every so often to make sure that all of the use cases you're working on and trying to enable are all working together and you've got a consistent view across the world. You absolutely have to do that. But the statement of, hey, as long as the thing that you're working on is something that something actually needs, right? And it's a clear, well-defined gap in your customer's currently existing environment, you're already on the right path, right? At the very
Mhm.
least, it massively lessens the kind of like sunk cost you might have to have in the event that you need to re-architect or you need to rebuild. Going one step further than that, right? It also means that once you understand those needs and those gaps very well, as you select your technologies, you know when there's something that you need to have that is either necessary for
Mhm.
your project's completion, but is not um, a competitive advantage in and of itself, making it a great candidate for something that you might go out and buy. Or it's something that's so core and so fundamental to your service, you must control your destiny in that at a fine grained level, meaning it's a great option to build. The calculus is going to be different no matter what you do in terms of that overall technical stack. But the most
Mhm.
important thing that you can do is make sure that you've always got good reasoning for the decisions that you make, because your environment's going to be different than Twilio's. It's going to be different on a customer by customer basis. Just make sure you understand why you've made that choice and what criteria you need to reconsider that decision in the future and what benefit you would get from that reconsideration.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And Zachary, it seems like you are looking at it from a very, very technical perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what are the things that foundationally, fundamentally can be scaled? What are some of the systems that we can build reliably? And it seems like all of your assumptions around what to build, how to build, surfaces around this. That, hey, how do we build whatever we're building with scalability in mind since day one?
Yeah.
So when you're doing that, I know, of course, like, there's there's going to be a lot of challenges when it comes to building these systems reliably from like an infrastructure perspective, uh, from like the latency of the application itself that you're trying to build. But as soon as we introduce AI components to it, especially with like generative AI models, when you're trying to like use LLM in between for like some classification tasks or like for some generative tasks, all of these AI driven applications start introducing latency issues to
Hmm.
it. And because you are operating at such a huge scale, that latency can start adding up across like multiple parts of your pipeline, and that's something that can come and bite you back, especially when you're going from a traditional systems, or I wouldn't say like traditional, even like traditional machine learning systems, to something which is more focused on generative AI. And the sheer size of the model and the technical complexity of it, it adds to the end-to-end latency of anything that you're trying to build. So have you faced any of those challenges? Like what is your fundamental narrative around like how do we go tackle this?
Sure. Well, anytime you do more processing, right, you start running into speed of light issues. That's just physics when you get down to it, right? You're turning around and
Yeah.
saying, hey, I've some body of work to do. I'm now going to increase that body of work. Of course, things take a little bit more time, right? How you tackle that is going to be different for Twilio, right? Because we understand our channel so intimately and so deeply. There's a couple of approaches that we can take. One, tailor your environment, your technical stack to the use cases that you have, right? So that's just understanding your customer and understanding that use case. Don't do things you don't need to do. Don't add bells and whistles unless you know that your customer will get value for it. So the simple thing number one, don't do it, right? Simple thing number two, or getting slightly more complex number two, how deeply do you understand the specific domain that you are in, right? What is the ecosystem that surrounds you? What are the components of your environment that you control? Or in the case of, for example, Twilio, where we have all sorts of other systems out there like PSTN networks and so on and so forth,
Mhm.
right, that we have to interface with, right? What are the aspects of those that are the immovable variables, right? What can you do there? And at that point, you start having an architectural or a technical conversation, right? Can we push things to the edge? Can we do a distributed computing environment? Where can you shave milliseconds, right, from
Yeah.
every single interaction, right? Because you have a budget of how much time you can spend before your customer's experience degrades. Choosing where you spend that time and how much energy you put into shaving off those millis, right, is incredibly important, right? My advice to teams who are in such a situation is to measure everything. You can't optimize until you have a deep understanding of what actually is on the table for you. Where can you make trade-offs? What options can you take? And if you look at it purely from a technical perspective, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? A technical perspective alone only tells you the things that you can change in terms of the physics of the equation, right? But it's that understanding of the use case, your domain, kind of all of the stuff that surrounds it, the environment in which you ply your trade, that gives you
Yeah.
the information that you need to be able to do what I would consider to be the true optimizations, doing less, accomplishing
Yeah.
more, and scaling
Yeah.
things in a way that fits both the customer's need and the environment you exist in, right? Because again, there are just components that you can't do anything about. And so how
Yeah.
you operate within those constraints is incredibly important, right? The other thing that we like to do, and this is a Twilio specific thing, is
Hmm.
we've architected our environment to truly be a platform, right? We offer base fundamental capabilities. That's not to say that we don't have things higher in the stack, right? More
Hmm.
fully fit end-to-end off-the-shelf style solutions. But the bottom of the product always enables customers to take control of their own destiny and assemble via like Lego pieces kind of concept using our APIs, the specific nature of the environment and the customer experience that they want. That's something that we had made as a strategic decision 10 years ago or more now, right? Where we had decided that our fundamental offering is going to be API based. And that's something that always allows our customers to be able to turn around and make the same optimization choices. We can optimize the tech till the cows come home, so to speak, right? But ultimately, our customers know more about their use case than we ever will because they're the ones who have it. And so, as a
Yeah.
direct result, when you're getting way down and shaving off milliseconds off of the overall life of a transaction, right? Giving customers that ability to get under the hood and really fine tune aspects of how the system that they're building works is incredibly
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll
No,
say one more thing
100%. I
too
think,
while we're
yeah,
on
yeah,
this topic,
sorry.
right? This goes back into that calculus of build versus buy, right?
Mm,
There are certain things that Twilio is just going to be better at doing, right? And there are things that we're going to be worse at doing. And so one of the things that we've done overall is try to partner with best in class kind of
mhm.
participants in the larger ecosystem as well. You mentioned LLMs a minute ago, right? There's an
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
world of optimization just on the modeling side of it, right?
yeah,
For
yeah,
latency optimization, to say nothing of like the overall life of a life of a communication, which starts the moment you proverbially pick up the phone, right? And so Twilio will never be able to optimize every single one of those things perfectly. We've got areas of
yeah,
strength, and then we have areas where we rely on our partners to know more about certain aspects of the work than we do. And so we've worked with teams like Microsoft and OpenAI and 11 Labs to be able to do a lot of this step. They're a part of that build versus buy decision that we make
yeah,
for an architecture for every component of the life cycle of a particular use case, right? That continuous learning, that continuous measurement, and those ongoing adjustments are something that we do internally because we're who our customer depends on and trusts
yeah.
for this work. But we also partner with a large number of other firms to make sure that our outcomes here are the thing that we've measured and controlled for across the entire life of that experience.
Yeah. Totally, totally makes sense. I think like you very well structured it that hey, there's one part of it as like technical optimization that you can do to a system that you're building. The other question is around like why are you even building the system that you're building? And are there any components of that system that could be done differently?
That's right.
And then you're thinking about optimizing a completely new different system. So I think that that really like gives a perspective that hey, like maybe instead of thinking that hey, I have a system in place, how do I start thinking about optimizing that? Let's start questioning what components of that system can be done better.
Yeah.
So rather than like thinking about maybe like uh, adding oil to a older machine, let's start about thinking what new components of that machine can be really changed in order to make it more efficient.
Yeah, I think that
And
I mean that's absolutely right. And you see this like you brought in like a mechanical engineering example, right? You have general purpose machines like your average truck, for example, right?
Mhm.
And then you have specially built machines that
Yeah,
optimize in one particular area for a particular use case or a particular problem, right? And
yeah,
like there are times when you need the general use case, and there are times when you need the highly specialized tool. And understanding where that is and what that's doing is the part of empathizing with your customer, of understanding their
yeah,
use case. This is, I mean, overwhelmingly more than anything else that I've done. This is the
yeah,
biggest lesson of, I think, my career and probably the career of really any technologist, right? I think we all become technologists because we want to build things. And then the harsh lesson of the world is that at some point, it's less about the thing that you have built and more about the environment in which that thing continues to exist. What
yeah,
is the purpose that that thing is attempting to fulfill? And you want to fit the thing that you have built to that purpose as closely as possible. I think I said it a little bit before, but I'll just say it because it bears repeating. Right, every time you're able to ground your work, right, be it for a company, be it for an individual, be it for any level of that, anything that it is, right, if you are able
mhm,
to ground that, in this case like an AI strategy, in solving your customer's problem, everything
mhm,
else will flow from that. It may not always be easy,
yeah.
but it's going to be a heck of a lot less hard than doing it in the other way.
No, 100%. 100% agreeing to like, all the context that you mentioned around like systems and the environment that you've built it in. I did find something fascinating that you'd mentioned briefly around when does it make sense to like run systems on the end, or like when does it make sense to like run these models on the edge?
Yeah.
So one of the main reasons that we have seen, like even with traditional machine learning, with concepts like federated learning, like having differential privacy, all of this existed even with traditional machine learning models. And we have seen that with any sort of like sensitive information or confidential information that you have, it really becomes very hard to balance that data utility versus privacy challenge, because you're like, you do need more information in order to make it more personalized,
Sure.
and to be really able to like give the right recommendations, or to really make good use of that data. But at the same time, you have like, hey, it is going to compromise on the privacy and like security aspects of it. And as like Twilio is doing something which is the last mile, as you mentioned, right? You are touching on so much sensitive information around the way. Once you like go from like even traditional machine learning to LLMs, when a lot of the systems in between become non-deterministic, a lot of the flow in between becomes non-deterministic. When you're using reasoning models, you don't have a full control over what are the step breakdowns the model is going to make. In those scenarios, like, what is your philosophy around like data governance? Like, what are some of the technical guardrails that you have put in place that makes sure that, hey, like, we're using AI in all of these components, but we have all of these, like, system guardrails in place that makes the system not just like more efficient, but more secure, uh, more reliable, and like taking care of like the privacy concerns around it.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. No matter where you are, no matter what company you are, no matter what domain you're in, no matter what your ecosystem is, or the industry that you're a part of, you will always have to work with black boxes. Systems that are not the thing that you built, or systems that are an external dependency, or things that are
Mhm.
deeply, deeply complicated that no one engineer might understand, even if you collectively have a good knowledge of it. No matter what you do, you always have to work with black boxes. So that is in no way, thankfully, that is in no way exclusive to AI. It's a problem that
Yeah.
humanity has been dealing with. I mean, since we had commerce, when you get down to it, there's always something somewhere that you don't have direct visibility to, right?
Yeah.
And so AI has changed an aspect of that surface area, but has not changed the fundamental equation of having to deal with trust when you get down to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you think about this, right? One, you give your customers as much transparency as is possible. This is what we do to your data. This is what we will
Mhm.
not do to your data. This is who owns the data that you have provided us, and the things that
Mhm.
could be learned or operated with that. For Twilio, all of those things are spelled out very clearly and very explicitly in black and white. Twilio also
Yeah.
pioneered a lot of, I'm going to use lowercase um, model transparency oriented work with things like, for example, our AI nutrition facts, which is a very easy and relatively intuitive way, especially if you've spent time in the United States. It's a very intuitive way of understanding real quickly, hey, this is how the model that might be, these are the models that are a part of this particular product, and this is how those models work, what data they use,
Mhm.
what they use it for, what happens to it after. So step one is communicating to your customer, what are we doing? You're setting the expectations, and you're coming to a shared agreement. That way, everyone who engages in that like contract, the commerce action, knows what they're getting into. Cool.
Yeah.
That's really great, and that's helpful. Okay, let's go to the next step. What are you doing with stuff internally, right? So there's a ton of work that has gone into managing data, creating governance around it. Everything from making sure that you have clear schemas, being able to identify who the responsible owners are, tracking who internally and externally has access to material and how you revoke that, having all the auditability steps and logs. Every company does some portion of this, right? And Twilio
Mhm.
takes that quite seriously. And so it's a thing that we talk about and focus on to really a great deal. And I think you're never done with it. There's always a way to do it a little bit better. Even things like you
Yeah.
had mentioned differential privacy as a great example, or purely edge compute. These are things that we're either exploring or actively investing in right now
Yeah.
to be able to make sure that we can use them as appropriate. Not all
Yeah.
privacy preserving techniques are applicable in all circumstances, nor are they necessarily all usable at every single layer of scale. But the goal here is not to have one thing that solves the entirety of the problem. The goal here is to have many overlapping solutions that creates a robust and resilient multi-layered defense to make
Yeah.
sure that people who entrust their data with the company are being
Yeah.
correctly served in that trust, right? It's transparency and it's follow through, the continual improvement motion.
Yeah. 100%. I think like what you mentioned from like the trust perspective is also something that we have seen from like a technical standpoint, the same model cards and like having all of that even with traditional machine learning
Hmm.
systems, and
Hmm.
it's just being carried forwarded over to like the newer set of like generative AI technology.
Yeah.
I love the parts of like you when you mentioned like trust with the customers, and I see like that really like icks me on that. Hey, like it's not just a technical shift that we are seeing. It's not just something which is um fundamentally changing because the way we build AI, but it is also how do we think about the adoption, how do we think about that change in
Hmm.
organization,
Hmm.
how do we think about who's going to be using it, how they use it, how do they feel empowered by using a technology like that, how do they feel secure about themselves. And this needs to also change within an organization. I know like we were talking about like how this would look with respect to your customers, but when you're leading a team internally at Twilio, when you start thinking about like, hey, these are some of the tools that we want to work on, not just for building on our technology stack for the customers but also internally, there is a mindset shift. There's like a fundamental shift in the way that we operate. And maybe just throwing an example, right? Like we have seen some of the top leaders saying that, hey, like now that we have some amazing AI co-pilots and AI assistants, we'll not need to hire software engineers anymore, especially at like junior levels,
Hmm.
because like AI is going to be replacing them. I think that there is like a level of like fear. There is a level of is my role going to be relevant anymore? There is also a fundamental confusion within leadership of how do they start thinking about this change,
Yeah.
right? Like this is an entire paradigm shift of how you operate fundamentally, not just like building the tools for your customers but also internally how you operate. How do you think about like the next set of product launches? How do you think about like the productivity within your teams? So it's happening very very fast, and it's happening uh, so deeply integrated into the way organizations are structured that I would call it that it's more of a mindset shift than just a pure technology shift.
Hmm.
So what is your like say on that? How have you seen things changing internally at Twilio, and what are some of your tidbits that would be helpful for other leaders to do similar things in their organizations?
Yeah, so you've got a couple of layers here, right? Let's start from the inside of an organization moving out, right? So internal to an organization, like you had said, many people might be thinking about like, hey, do we even need junior developers anymore? Where are we going? What are we doing, right? My statement to that is you absolutely still need junior developers. There's no question about it, right?
Mhm.
AI is making the work you do faster and easier in the same way that power tools made carpentry faster and easier. You were never going to be in a situation where you were going to replace an actual human with like a power drill or
Yeah.
something, right? The power drill improved the human's output. The power drill made the work that the human was doing better, but it didn't replace them. How possibly could it, right? Think
Yeah.
back to the conversation that we've been having over the course of this discussion, right? The thing that I've kept going back to is that thing that AI does not do well and probably will not be doing well for quite a while, that larger scope contextualization, right?
Yeah.
So, like, AI may boost your productivity, and I sincerely hope it does, right? But ultimately, success starts with asking the right questions,
Hmm.
understanding your domain, and being able to validate the outputs, right? It's definitely going to alter the way we work mechanically, but it doesn't change the importance of the individuals doing that work. And I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question in the world that there are people out there who I hope are competing with me in the market who are saying we don't need junior developers anymore, AI will handle it all. I really
Yeah.
hope those people are my competitors, right? Because it will never be able to do it for anything more than the surface area, the veneer, the varnish, the skin deep layer of the work that we as software engineers, as data scientists, as machine learning operators do, right? So
Yeah.
that's statement one. Yes, it's a change, but like we all work in technology. We've been undergoing massive ways, changes in the tools we use and the mechanisms by which we do work for
Yeah.
years, decades now, right? Like, like both in terms of the technology we physically interact with, the tools that a builder or a practitioner uses, also in the way we do work. I mean, I'm dating
Yeah.
myself a little bit here, but like we all remember when Scrum and Agile started to come out, right?
Yeah.
That's a tool in the sense of like any process by which humans can change the way they interact with their world as a tool. But even
Yeah.
that was a fundamental shift. And I remember like, gosh, I would have been in my undergrad when this was kind of like going on. But like even for a while there, people
Yeah.
were saying like with tools like agile processes and different ways of thinking about work and all that other material, does that change the way we do things? And yeah, it does, but it didn't make the concept of the things that we need to do and the area where the value is, it didn't make it obsolete. And I don't think AI is going to do the same. It'll change aspects of it. It will alter some of the economics, but fundamentally, humans are still really great at
Yeah.
that larger spectrum of thought. What are we doing? What's the real point, purpose, and cause of it? And how do I know if the tool has generated me correct solutions? How do I know that I've been successful? Okay, great. So that's inside of a company. Let's talk about externally now, right? You have a large number of things, which is, hey, if AI is changing the way we work, is it also changing the way we communicate, right? Is it changing like the authenticity of communications? Is it creating synthetic material? Is it changing the larger cultural norms about how we as people interact with each other in a world where you could receive an email that was generated by a machine? Right.
Yeah.
And I'm using email as an example. Please don't think I'm making light of it, but like the point being, like you could interact with some media that wasn't authored by a human, right?
Yeah.
So let's think about that for a second there too, right? There's no question that AI is beginning to change the economics of such work. It is becoming cheaper and it is becoming faster and it's becoming easier to create mechanically or machine generated content at all points in time, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of the nature of that content itself. But again, here, this is something that humans have been working with for many years. Now, there's analogous environments, right? Maybe not perfect ones, but at the very least, analogous environments in terms of mass marketing and mass mailing that have been going on for as long as I've been alive, certainly.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't think anyone particularly thinks that the advertisements they get in their mailbox are necessarily targeted just for them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we've been in that space right now where Twilio sees and where I see, I think a lot of the benefit that we have here is bringing that to, do you trust the sender? Right? There's a difference between, was the content algorithmically generated, which every single time you get like a mass email with an offer inside, or a message from like a local restaurant saying, hey, here's a coupon 10% off, nobody was sitting there thinking, I personally know Zachary and he's just way into pasta right now, I want to try and get his pasta dollar, right?
Yeah.
So like no one's doing that, right? So that is mechanically generated in the same way that an LLM might produce material now. But where you can improve that situation is by saying, hey, if there's someone who sent me that communication, do I know who that person was? Do I recognize, do I know that it came from the brand that I think? Did it come from the person that I believe? Whatever it might be, regardless of how that message was authored, right? And so there's a bunch of material that you can do in there. Like there's offerings that, again, Twilio has things for like branded calling and SMS. You want to have that, like the firm has a vision of making every single customer interaction, even if those customer interactions are being powered by an autonomous mechanism, making every single one of those interactions at least beneficial for both the customer and the firm, right? You want to have a positive experience, even if you're interacting with something automated, in the same way you can have a positive experience if you're interacting with a human. Does that make sense?
Fair.
Okay.
Yeah. And Zach, I think like one of the I loved the analogy that you shared, right? That a tool is not going to be necessarily replacing the craftsman.
Hmm.
The tool just makes the craftsman better.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with the way that you're thinking. And like the core fundamental way that I personally believe that human intelligence cannot be ever replaced with whatever the biggest size of AGI that we can build is the sheer amount of information that we as humans store. And it's just something which is incomprehensive, right? Like it's not something that we can really replicate in a machine. Even if you attach whatever number of GPUs to it, even if you attach like even if you expand the context window to whatever size that you want to think about, there's a fundamental difference in how humans understand things holistically and have this like dynamism in our minds of where to zoom in and where to zoom out that models fundamentally don't have.
It's the
Our
synthesis step.
first,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Right. Like breadth and depth of knowledge. I mean, sooner or later, a computer is just going to be better at me than it, right? Like
yeah,
in terms of breadth. But we're still very much in the world where we haven't achieved AGI, right?
yeah,
And as a
yeah,
direct result, humans are still better at performing that synthesis and creation step, especially inside of worlds and domains that have
yeah,
not already been exposed to the model,
yeah,
right? If you're trying to do cutting edge material, if you're trying to do things that people haven't done before or might be niche or something along those lines, the difference between a human and an LLM is night and day, just absolutely night and day.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
completely agree.
Completely. So when you're like thinking about speaking with data scientists or like the AI enthusiasts who are thinking about like building a career in machine learning in AI, what would you say are the set of like skills, or like maybe like make it a little bit broader, right? Like any professional, engineering professional who's thinking about like, hey, I want to build a career in and around AI. What would you say are the skills, whether it be technical or otherwise, that will make them feel that they are indispensable?
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, big big airy statements first, and then we'll get a little lower, right? First, right, same thing that I've been saying over the course of this conversation, right? You are ultimately trying to find yourself in a position where you are
Mhm.
able to turn around and make sure that the thing you are best at, because there's no
Yeah,
technology that can replicate it right now, right? But
yeah,
the thing that you want to be best at is the overall process of systems thinking, right? So think through the entire technical motion,
hmm,
things like, how does everything fit together, from the data to the models to the infrastructure, and finally the technical aspects of governance, right?
hmm,
And how does that impact the ultimate end result you're trying to achieve? So, one, do you understand what your end goal is? Two, do you understand the end to end motion of how you achieve that goal technically? And then
hmm,
finally, do you understand what metrics, measurements, anything else along those lines you are going to collect, and how you're going to collect them to ensure that that technical motion is consistently achieving your overarching goal? That's the punchline, right?
yeah,
There are specific skills that if you're getting hired right now, and if you were coming towards one of the open roles that I have, I will obviously look for, because I need you to have certain specific skills in the moment
hmm,
to achieve those goals in the long term. But there's a massive difference that you see inside of candidates, right?
hmm,
Having those skills is necessary, but again, not sufficient. Having those skills and having a larger perspective, that systems thinking
yeah,
motion, and the ability to determine how, on a use case by use case basis, you're able to measure if the capabilities you develop are achieving the goals and ends that you have set out to accomplish. That's a world difference. Mastering that is the single largest investment that you can make that will consistently pay off over the course of your career, regardless of how the nature of your work changes. Full
yeah.
stop.
100%,
Full stop. Yeah.
100%. I love that. Like, that's, I feel, a very, very valuable tip and a new way of looking at, hey, how do you really present your skills
Yeah.
and how do you really go beyond how well you can code or like how good you
That's right.
are from like technical perspective.
Yeah.
So, love the feedback that you have there. So I just want to like do this like fun activity with you because it really brings out some honest answers or like things that you have probably sitting in some other part of your brain, but oftentimes doesn't come out. So I want to do like a quick rapid fire round with you where I'm going to start with giving you some sentences, and I want you to like complete that, and then I'll have like some more interesting questions for you, which is outside of like all the tech stuff that you've been doing. So first things first, like in 5 years, where do you think AI will be?
I think it's going to be pervasive. I think it's going to be consistently leveraged, and I think it will become increasingly boring. Right now, it's very exciting, right? But the thing that
Yeah.
we've seen with any piece of technology that starts exciting is that eventually it becomes boring. And the moment it becomes boring, it is boring because it is reliable, it is pervasive, and it is governed at the end of the day. All frontiers close. I don't know if it's going to close within 5 years or within 10 years, but you can
Yeah.
already feel how the frontiers are beginning to close in different areas. And I think that, in some point it will become another boring piece of technology.
Love it. What's the biggest myth in AI?
Oh, that anything regarding the mathematics inherently is going to trump better data, better evaluation, and having an effective product market fit, right? Like fundamentally, when you get down to it, right? Now, that statement is wrong every 7 years, right? Every
Mhm.
7 years, something algorithmically happens that for a moment turns it on its head. And then it's immediately proven right again. So, for example, right? 7 years ago, LLMs just weren't functionally a thing. Yes, yes, yes. We can go all the way back to the life and times of OpenAI and all the other work that goes into it and the transformer model, all that other good stuff. But fundamentally, right, from a pragmatic perspective, right, the technology just wasn't there, right? Then all of a sudden the technology shows up. The math gets better, right? And you see this immediate sea shift where
Yeah.
everything improves incredibly and the math matters enormously.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you hit a plateau again, where
Yeah.
again, better data, better evaluation, and ensuring that the thing that you're doing is solving your market problem becomes the primary differentiator, right?
Yeah.
That is the ball. About every 7 years, that's the ball game. So you have like 6 months where the algorithmic side suddenly dominates, and then you have the remaining 6 years and 6 months focused on those other things.
No, 100%. Well, that's a very good myth that you just busted for us. Okay, so if I were to ask you like one skill that any AI professional should have.
Yeah, I would go back to my previous answer, which would be that systems level thinking and the capability to perform just ruthless measurement, right?
Yeah.
What you do with those measurements is up to you. It's there's a calculus completely around it, right? But you can't make that decision, or at the very least, you cannot make that decision firmly unless you have
Yeah.
the data that you need to actually base yourself in that choice. Otherwise, you're just going with the direction that your gut is. And if you're ever going to do that, I want you to do it intentionally and not unintentionally.
Fair,
Yeah. Yeah.
100%. Okay, so I mean, like we have seen a lot of tools just come over in our lives in the last 2 to 3 years.
Mm.
So, what is that one AI tool that you absolutely cannot live without, which probably didn't exist like 3 years ago, but then now is like such a part and parcel of your life that you're like, I can't live without
Oh,
this?
anything integrated into my IDEs or other forms of text editing, right? Any kind of integration component in there makes it so much easier because I think that with any new technology, and this is going back to like the kind of accessibility work that
Mhm.
Steve Yegi used to write about in terms of platforms, right? One of the things that Steve said in what is now a very famous essay, right? Which I think he's maybe a little he finds a little awkward, but he said the most important thing in computer science is accessibility, right?
Mhm.
And that is for any kind of pragmatic application, right? Industry
Mhm.
oriented application. That's absolutely true. And so the presence of an LLM is great. That's wonderful. But the moment you integrate that closer and closer into the actual operative loop that a human is going through, that's
Mhm.
the big thing there. So that integration layer, I actually think is the magic bullet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that you told us about like an AI tool that you use from a professional perspective, tell us about an AI tool that you use, which is like a personal tool that you're using from for your day-to-day life.
Oh, sure. Many years ago, I had gotten into spending. I had bought my first house, and finally had the space to buy a smoker, like for grilling. Right.
Yeah.
The trick with smoking is that it takes a long time, and you don't really know if it's done until it's done. Right.
Yeah.
And so many years ago, I had instrumented my grill at the time. with a camera that just kept a visual eye on when we
Huh.
thought things would be done. And so
Yeah.
that was just a silly thing that I did to try and figure out when I was able to go out and actually declare it to be done. Tie that in with a thermometer. You actually get some pretty useful information that way.
That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. So, okay, one last thing that I want to ask you. I mean, obviously, like now everybody's writing about AI in some form or the other on LinkedIn. But if you could delete like one buzzword that you've been seeing lingering around on LinkedIn a lot, and you're like, I don't believe in this, or like, maybe we have had too much of this, what would that buzzword be?
The misuse of AGI. We don't have AGI
Okay.
now. We don't
Yeah.
know when we're going to have AGI. We're not
Yeah.
about to have it anytime soon. So like if anyone is about to write a phrase on LinkedIn and they're about to use AGI in some kind of doom and gloom or like, oh, we've achieved it now or something like that, if I could
Yeah.
delete all of those posts, I would do so in a heartbeat.
I mean, I think like the majority of the people don't even there's no like standard definition of what AGI would look like, right? Like I probably define what AGI is to me in a very different way than anybody else would define. Like, is it fully autonomous? I don't think there'll
I
be a
know a
world where
team of
AI
researchers
tools
that
are
would
going to be
happily
fully
go to
autonomous.
war over that opinion, right? No, I get it, I get it, and like it is a soft boundary, and with things like
Yeah,
the Turing test, for example, once you've achieved it, the goalposts move again, right?
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I'm not basing any of this in rigorously argued fact or
yeah.
even considering the position that I have right now in light of the fact that language is ambivalent and is constantly evolving. You asked me for a strongly opinionated statement that might be controversial, and that's what it was.
Totally makes sense. Well, Zach, thanks a lot for joining me today. It was a wonderful conversation, and thank you for like giving us a very, very deep dive into
Sure.
the technical stack, into like the best practices that you're thinking about from Twilio's perspective. And it's definitely a great learning experience for all of the listeners because you're running a company at such a humongous scale, and you're able to like incorporate all of these AI tools in a very mindful manner, thinking about the use case rather than like the technology first approach, which is very, very fascinating. So thank you so much for joining me today. It was wonderful speaking with you, and I'm sure people will have a lot of takeaways from
Well,
this.
thank you for having me. I've really appreciated it. I really enjoyed the time with you today. Thank you so much.